Big announcement. Speaker Kirk, but they cut a deal with the Democrats and Dominion, and everybody's going to get a rebate back, and I can't wait because I got tax cuts. I'm getting rebates. Life is good right now under the Trump administration. All kinds of money coming back to you. And don't worry about the stock market, right? Stocks go up, stocks go down. It's going to be fine. Actually, you know what? The Dow Jones Industrial Average, it was actually down 1,600 at about 3 o'clock and then rallied, came back, was only down 1,100. So it's all how you look at it. Don't panic. Everything's going to be fine the next day or so. Things will straighten out. There's always these kinds of adjustments. So I wouldn't be concerned. We'll have our first opening bell report to you before we get off the air. Joining us now, Republican Speaker of the House of Delegates in Virginia, Republican Colonial Heights, where in the Republican House of Delegates, 51 is the new 67. I love that line because we made it up last week. 51 is the new 67. Doesn't matter if they won by a coin toss. Cox running the show. And he's joining us now. Kirk Cox, Speaker of the House. Mr. Speaker, it's good to have you.
John, always good to be with you. Thanks.
So I understand there's a deal going down here with Dominion Energy, and I understand that means that I'm going to get a little rebate going. Tell us.
Yeah, it certainly looks that way. A bill came out of the Senate committee yesterday, and it will be about $200 million in direct refunds to customers, and that figure is pretty dramatically up from when the bill started. There's also, because of the federal tax reform, which we all think is great, about $125 million in savings they're going to pass on. So that's sort of direct. And then I think if you look overall, there's some other savings and that I think will add up, I think, over the lifetime of sort of the bill to $1 billion. So I think it's a good deal. Much better than when it started. So people are pretty encouraged down here. A good vote out of committee.
So, Mr. Speaker, let me ask you this. I kind of forgot about that. So the Dominion Energy, that's a public utility, right, that you guys regulate, but they're part of the tax cut, right? Their taxes go from 35% to 21%, and that's estimated they're going to save $125 million. Where does that money go? Back to us?
Yes, that's going to go directly back to customers. That's part of the negotiation. So you get a nice double. Usually double hit's a bad thing. This is a good thing, where you're going to get both the $200 million refund and the $125 million in tax savings. So that's pretty substantial, John.
You know, I can do math. That's $325 million going back to Virginia consumers of energy. And the refund, that's going to be prorated, right, based on a percentage of what you've paid?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Yeah, the final bill's not through yet. But
now, how did you get this done? Because you had to get Saslow behind it, Democrats behind it. The governor appointed, right, a negotiator from Virginia Commonwealth University there in Richmond. So just walk us through, because anything with Dominion is always challenging because you got people on both sides. How did you get this done?
Well, the bill started off probably around $125 million return to customers, and then, probably not quite as much SEC oversight, and then, probably not quite as aggressive in some of the alternative and renewable energy. So I would say on our side, Terry Kilgore is one of our main negotiators, and he was going up with that anyway. But to credit to the governor, he sort of weighed in, and there was a sort of a mediation group that looked at, some of those other areas we've talked about today, and they came back. And so sort of the end package is what we've talked about today, and the governor got behind it, which I think was very important. We had a great announcement on regulatory reform yesterday. So these are two areas that I think we've worked very well together, which is good, bodes well.
So tell us about your announcement on regulatory reform.
Well, I could not be more excited about this. As you know, John, the Trump administration has done great work here. I've been a bit frustrated the last 2 years with the progress we've made on regulatory reform. We have made it a priority. We've had a lot of bills. We've just never sort of gotten there. So we went to the governor pretty early, said, this is just a real priority. And in fairness, once again, he came to the table, and what we basically did was two of our biggest agencies that do so many things, Department of Professional Occupational Licensing and the Department of Criminal Justice Services, we basically, over the next 3 years, are going to streamline their regulations by 25%. which I think is really good. And the other thing we're doing is we eventually, and I think it's going to work dramatically like it is on the national level. Of course, my goal would be to spread that all throughout all the agencies. The other thing that we did was that our Department of Planning and Budget is already supposed to be tracking and reporting sort of the extent to which agencies are complying with existing requirements, and they're supposed to really be reviewing those every 4 years. I don't think that's really happening. And so another part of this deal is that's really going to happen. So if we can sort of set a baseline for where these agencies are, and then hopefully in a few years we'll have all of these agencies doing that. So I think that's a practical goal, and hopefully will really eliminate some of these barriers to entry and just really help folks that are looking to get into DPOR, particularly regulates professions and occupations, and really try to lower some of these regulations and barriers to people getting, good jobs and really being entrepreneurs. So I'm really excited about that. We've announced that we had Dick Saslaw and David Toscano, myself, Michael Weberts, the patron of the bill, and Governor Northam and Aubrey Lane, the Secretary of Finance. So nice kumbaya moment. So feeling good about that one.
You have to feel good about the level of bipartisanship that's going on right now. The tone seems to be pretty civil between everyone. I know when the Democrats came in and there was a lot of animosity going about the coin toss and Shelley Simons and all that. But look, that's in the rearview mirror. It seems like you've got a pretty good relationship, Mr. Speaker, with the governor and with Dick Saslaw in the Senate. Looks like you're getting things done.
We are. I mean, John, we've talked about this. One of the big ones is obviously going to be the Medicaid issue. And on that one, we haven't made quite as much progress. As you know, we have really pushed very hard the reform piece, and particularly we're excited about sort of what Kentucky has done and what we would like to do, especially promoting workfare. And as I've talked to you on numerous times, I'm just a big believer in what the dignity of work does to lift people up. And our goal has to be to help people to become self-sufficient and, get to work. And on that one, we haven't made as much progress. I was disappointed yesterday to get a physical impact statement back, which I just thought was ridiculous, on how much it's going to cost to go to workfare. And so that piece, I think we have, more work to be done. We're sort of looking for the governor publicly to start saying that he is for some of these reforms. So that's a big issue with us. And so that's an area that we would obviously like to see sort of the governor's public statements start to match more of his private statements.
So the workforce situation, when you look at Medicaid expansion in a traditional Affordable Care Act sense, Mr. Speaker, the expansion of Medicaid is supposed to be to working class Virginians that make too much money. They have jobs, they work, they make too much income to qualify for traditional Medicaid or for CHIP, yet they don't make enough money to buy their insurance. That's the 400,000 people that we keep talking about that fall into the gap. And then, of course, VHHA saying they'll fund any shortfall from the federal government so that the Virginia Treasury is not hit by any of these costs. That remains to be seen. But my question is, why would workfare impact traditional Medicaid expansion when it's supposed to be for people that are working anyway? I failed to get anybody to answer me that question.
Well, remember, number one, our workfare bill, since we have not expanded Medicaid yet, the workfare bill really hits the traditional population. So
right.
Since we're not in that ballpark yet, it would basically be for those that are under the 50-50 match. But you're right. I mean, eventually, and as a matter of fact, the governor's fiscal impact statement assumes we're going to expand Medicaid, which is not a good assumption, and then applies it to that. But once again, you'll probably got, I think our analysis shows about 151,000 of that 300,000 actually would fall into that category that, currently, they're not working. And so, I think it'll very much apply to that group. And it's, I think, very fair the way it's done. It's graduated. You have to work a certain amount of hours, and then it's graduated. It's like 5, 10, 15, up to 20. And, I think that's very, very important. So I think our analysis says that's about how many people would actually fall into that category. So there is a fairly big component that are not.
So, Mr. Speaker, why would Democrats argue with that? I mean, if the compromise was let's go with the work requirement, which the Trump administration has already given that waiver to states. That's already done. I mean, if you want to get people covered and then you've got a reform work requirement that the presidential administration has already wavered, I mean, what on earth would be the Democrats' arguments opposed to that? I mean, what logic would say no?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm trying to figure out that logic. I mean, one of the things they were saying is they put a very high physical impact statement on the cost of training, et cetera. And I just got to tell you, I mean, we were saying the other day, only in government math does taking people from welfare to work costs money, and we just think that physical impact statement is sort of what they're hiding behind. Is this is going to be so expensive? But it just defies logic, and this is where people get, I think, upset with government. That it's just counterintuitive to think if you can get a lot of those 151,000 people to work, and eventually, I think full-time jobs. I mean, think how transformative that will be, down the line, and my number one goal here is to basically help people make sure they do get work. But think of the cost savings, and the frustration is it's almost as if you go off of Medicaid, they almost say that will cost more money, and it just that's the kind of rhetoric I think is just frustrates people. So, and we saw, go back to George Allen, we saw this with welfare reform, that we saw the same arguments that, it will be catastrophic, et cetera. And what we saw was fair reform where people were helped with child care, et cetera, but they also went to self-sufficiency. So it's just that mentality that I think the more people you have on the rolls, for some reason that's a good thing. And, you're helping 400,000 people. I'd rather help people get to self-sufficiency and have roles that are greatly reduced. So it's just a difference, I guess, in philosophy.
Right. And look, I mean, one can take the position, Mr. Speaker, on Medicaid expansion that it is a transitionary plan because for the most part, as you acknowledged, it's for working people. You want them to keep making money, get a better job, move up, right now they'd be covered if you did expand it. But the goal is for them to get in a position where they can buy their own insurance, and this idea that you would keep yourself down in order to qualify for Medicaid. I guess there's some studies out there that say people do that. But, given the choice, I think most people, if they're working, they want to be successful, right? They want to make more money, move up in their company, maybe become a manager so that they can then not qualify for Medicaid expansion. I don't know who would keep themselves down because they can just get health insurance. I'm sure there's some people in that category, but I think that really muddies the argument. So when you look at Medicaid...
Well, if I could real quick, I think you hit the nail on the head is do you have faith in people or not? Do you think people inherently, in that situation are going to work hard for their families to improve themselves? And I would say yes. And it's amazing what people will do if you give them the chance. But this mentality of, I think it's a lack of confidence sometimes in what people can do. And, I just don't share that.
Well, I agree with you 100%. Mr. Speaker, if Medicaid expansion gets on the table, right, there's not a bill, there's not separate legislation for it. McAuliffe put it in the budget. Former Governor McAuliffe put it in the budget. Northam's going with it. So walk us through the onion-making process here. I mean, how does it get to the table? How will it eventually get voted on one way or the other?
Yeah, the governor put in the budget, and please remember what the governor did, which people are not focused. He put a provider tax in, about $300 million on hospitals. That's a tax that helps pay for the state share. So you're not getting any cost savings there. And I think a lot of people sort of don't, figure that in. And he has spent that money. There's about another $120 million, he would say, and in some ways he's correct, that you save money like inmate medical cost. Obviously, that we're sort of assuming now would be covered by Medicaid expansion. And so the way the budget process works is you can either keep that in or you can take that out. And obviously, as you know, in years past, we've basically taken that out. We have something called the Stanley Amendment that basically says that the only way you can expand Medicaid is through appropriation. And so, or you can do it through a standalone bill. One of the things that we keep harping on is the Jason Mayar's workfare bill is a bill, and that's going through the process. And that's, for us, a good barometer. Are the Democrats going to back that workfare bill? And we've been very insistent. We have to have key reforms before we would agree to have Medicaid expansion in the budget. And, right now that's the first test of one of the key reforms. So that's sort of how the process will work. You'll either have a budget that, could have, obviously what Governor McAuliffe had. You could have a hybrid of that, or you could not have that at all, and, basically say to the governor that, if you really want that, you've got to come to the table and help people with key reforms to make sure this program is going to be sustainable in the out years.
So you're looking for the governor to compromise here and lead a compromise that is going to emphasize Medicaid reform before you're willing to consider expanding it. Is that my understanding?
It's very key that we have the reforms. And I think if you look at Indiana and Kentucky and some states
Right.
that have implemented those reforms beyond workfare, that really have set up more private-type models with health savings accounts and giving people skin in the game by reasonable premiums. I think in Indiana the premiums average about $27 an individual, but really incentivizing them to, really, make healthy choices. I mean, one of the things Indiana does, which I love, is if they're doing preventive medicine, if they're doing their well checkups, their premiums actually reduce from the $27. And if you're going to an emergency room when you shouldn't, there's a copay involved. So there's just some very smart reforms that we're really looking to see.
And then why not go off the Indiana model? Why do you have to recreate the wheel if you got something that's moderately successful that Mike Pence and his state legislator created? As I said before, if it's good enough for the vice president, it's good enough for me. So, obviously they've been successful with it. I think that makes a lot of sense to try to do that. But if you don't get it, it sounds like the process is that Republicans control the budgeting process in the General Assembly. You're simply going to strip it out.
Well, I think if you don't get that, the difficulty you have, then you're stuck with straight Medicaid expansion. And I can tell you that's just unacceptable. It just will break our budget. So I would say that's just not acceptable to us.
Without the reforms.
Yes.
Right. All right. So you're trying to fix the problem. And then if you do that, then it sounds like you're willing to look at expanding it with the reforms and modifications in there, similar to what Indiana did. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I just want to be sure you understand it.
Yeah, I think where we are in the process right now is that we have some key reforms that we've talked to the governor about, and before we're going to move on that issue, he's got to come to the table publicly on those reforms.
I think that's a pretty reasonable request. And so have you had a direct dialogue with the governor on that, on what you just said?
Yeah, I would say that, I've talked to the governor several times, and like I said, we talked through the regulatory reform issue and some other issues and made good progress on that one. I think we're very clear where we're both at, and so we're at the stage now where we're looking for some public, assurances from the governor on these reforms.
Well, I tell you what, Mr. Speaker, sounds like you're going down the right path with this. A little bit of a different style he's got than Terry McAuliffe. Terry McAuliffe,
no question about that.
A little less bombastic. I just tell this quick 20-second story. I was at some event, I think it was for Tesla the other day, and somebody said to me, hey, you should go ask the governor to get on your show. And I'm like, yeah, I need to call his communication people. And they're like, no, he's right over there. And I'm like, where? And he's like, right over there. If Terry McAuliffe had come in that room, right, you would have everybody within 2 miles of that place would have known that McAuliffe was there. But Northam, very different, kind of comes in, no fanfare, no bombast, no bands, no singing girls. He just comes in and starts talking to people. Very different, Mr. Speaker, than McAuliffe was. So maybe that's a good thing. Right, different style sometimes.
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I've said from the very beginning that style lines up with, my style much more. So much more comfortable.
The Kirk Cox style. Just have a conversation.